I'm eagerly awaiting to hear what John McMullen has to say.
He's with us now, live at the NovaCare Center, where the Sam Bradford-led Eagles had OTAs today. He also spoke to the media. And I don't know, John, did he clear up some things for you? Are you still feeling that Tom Condon fell on the sword for him, or did they get their story pretty straight?
I think they got their story pretty straight. Sam claimed that Tom gave him advice and he trusts him as his longtime agent that has gotten him $100 million over the years. So that part is understandable. And I think it's understandable that Tom Condon looked at the landscape and said, it's probably a better opportunity if I can get my client to Denver. And that's what he tried to do. He didn't succeed, and it didn't work. And now Sam's back, and he sort of painted it as a business decision, as did most of the players in the locker room, and that's what we expected. And hopefully we can move on because, as Doug Peterson said today a number of times, Sam is his guy for this year.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll say this. I thought both sides, Peterson and Bradford, handled it pretty well, right? I think if you were expecting them to do something today, did they check off all the check boxes?
Yeah, they did. And they did all they could do. And as we said, this day was always going to be a little bit awkward. And it was that, probably more so for Sam than for Doug, but he got through it. He got through it pretty well. He took all the number one reps. So, and as I said, in the locker room, it's pretty clear that the players don't have any issue with what he did. So I think from this point forward, it starts to morph into how quickly can the Eagles get Carson Wentz ready, and is it feasible for this organization to move forward with Sam Bradford for the entire season?
John McMullen with us. John, when Sam says, I'm not completely naive, what do you hear him saying at that point? And did you wish that you were able to, cut it and say, but,
No, basically, he's right. He's not. Basically, what he's saying is, I'm not stupid. And he realizes what the Eagles gave up for the number 2 overall pick in the draft, and that means that his future long-term is not in Philadelphia, and that's what he was trying to express. And I don't know anyone who disagrees with that aspect of it, but he's also come to grips with the realization that this is his only opportunity to be a starting quarterback in the NFL in 2016, and if he wants to be a starting quarterback in 2017, well, then he's going to have to play well for the Philadelphia Eagles. So I think it's, on one hand, it's a little begrudging that he admits that, but he certainly isn't naive enough to think that he could somehow keep this team as his own because Carson Wentz is going to be the guy.
How genuine did you find his comments about Carson Wentz? I know he talked that they had been together. Did you find those to be sincere, and what did you learn in his comments about Carson Wentz?
Yeah, I thought they were sincere as far as they just met this week on Monday, so it's not like they know each other or have developed a fast friendship, but I've always thought, even at the crux, and Mike will tell you, Sam's too professional to not do his job once he gets into the building. And if Carson asks him a question or asks him how to read a particular defense or what a receiver's supposed to do on a particular play, he's going to help him just because he is a professional. That part of it I never doubted, and I think that'll end up being true.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Obviously there's a part of everybody who probably should feel that this is not a healthy situation. Do you think that has been cleared?
I don't think it's a healthy situation for the football team, not in the fact of being a cancer in the locker room or anything of that nature. I just don't think it's a good plan for the football team. And that aspect of it, I don't think it's healthy because I don't think it's realistic. And we've mentioned before about how much pressure this team is going to be under to start moving forward, especially if they don't win a lot of games. If they win, it's not an issue. But I look at what I saw out there on the field today, and granted, some of the pieces aren't there, and I don't see a legitimate contender in the NFC East, never mind the NFC as a whole. So I don't know how realistic this plan can be.
John, also, there's a lot of stuff here. He opened up by saying he didn't come or he requested the trade because he was frustrated and that if he did show up, it wouldn't have helped out because he needed to clear his head. Is that an acceptable enough answer for you?
It is for me. I'm not sure for everybody else. I understood why he was upset, and I think anybody would be a little disappointed if somebody drafted your eventual replacement that high because the end game there, and the end game is not good for you. So I've always understood the emotional side. I don't have a problem with us clearing his head, so to speak. And it is voluntary. We call it a mini holdout or whatever terminology you want to use, but technically Sam never held out of anything because he didn't have to be here under the terms of the CBA. So I understand the emotional aspect of it, but obviously it didn't play well to the fan base. And Sam also knows that because he knows he's not a very popular guy right now.
At the very end, John, there were some questions of the exact timetable and nature of, when was he told and who said what to whom. How did you interpret his comments about Tom Condon specifically and who made the decision on that?
Well, he claimed that he took Tom's advice, and I have to take him at his word on that. And I've mentioned before, I think it was prudent advice from Tom Condon because I think if they were able to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish, and that's get to the Denver Broncos, that would have been a much better situation for Sam Bradford. I don't think anybody can deny that aspect of it. As far as should he have taken control of the situation when it started to go off the rails from a public relations standpoint? Sam doesn't have social media. He doesn't do Twitter. He's not a Facebook guy. So I'm not sure if he thinks about that kind of stuff and if he thinks about how he's coming across to the casual fan base or the general public. And in a lot of ways, I don't think he handles that aspect of it all that well. But it is what it is, and he at least understands why the fans are upset, and he seems to understand that he has to win them back, so to speak.
How about the other players? Because I know you were in the locker room today, too. There was some locker room availability. How do they seem to be handling the Sam Bradford situation? I'm sure they got asked a lot of questions about Sam as well.
Yeah, it was basically all Sam related. Zach Ertz, who is always one of the Eagles that is most willing to talk, spun it like a business decision. Jordan Matthews did the same thing, and he understands that, look, everybody's got their personal issues they have to deal with, and players tend to look the other way as long as you're in the locker room. And Jordan got asked a very good question about, how do you move forward as a player, understanding that Sam's not going to be here long term? And he made a good point. He's like, look, the guy's got to be a professional. He's made almost $100 million after this season. I've made $1 million, and I'm going to run my butt off for him, so he better play for me. And that's how the players look at it. And I think that's exactly what will happen. I think Sam will give it his all when he's on the field. The question with him has always been he just hasn't performed well, not that he hasn't given the effort to do it.
John, how do you think this kind of was shaped? Did the Eagles and Sam Bradford get together on this? Were they on the same page? Did they meet maybe yesterday and map this day out? How do you think, does it seem like the Eagles and Bradford were on the same page today?
No, I think they were on the same page, but they didn't map anything out. They kind of ignored it. And Doug said in his press conference, and I confirmed with a number of players who didn't hear Doug's words in the locker room, they didn't talk about it. He didn't mention it as far as addressing the team. And it just pretty much came and went. And it was only 7 days as far as the players, as far as work goes. So he was barely gone. And they just saw him back in the locker room one day. And Jordan Matthews did say that he did not take first-team reps and sort of some of the throwing drills when he came back, when the media wasn't allowed, but he worked his way back up. That took all of a week. And he took all the first-team reps today. So their big plan, as far as the Eagles went, was basically to ignore it and just let it happen as far as the quarterback being the leader of the team.
With regards to some of the other things that Bradford kind of, they asked him if he had any regrets. He kind of said no. He was asked whether or not that he would have signed the contract back on March 1st. He said, well, I don't really know a lot of the facts, so I can't really answer that question. Were there a lot of things that were unclear going into today that got cleared up, or was that just him going out there doing what he had to do but didn't really answer everything to the way that put some closure to this situation?
No, I think there's closure to it, and I think what we did learn is that Sam, I think, does rely on Tom Condon, and he's going to follow his advice. And you can respect that or you can dislike it, but that's the reality. And he's done, let's be honest, he's done a heck of a job for Sam Bradford as far as what he's supposed to do. So it's understandable why Sam trusts him. Some people, and I've criticized him in the past, saying he's a grown man, he should make his own decisions, and he should instruct his agent. And you can certainly frame it that way if you would like. But if you're in a football negotiation, I would rely on Tom Condon too. So when you frame it that way, you kind of understand Sam's behavior. And it just didn't work out for their particular camp, and now he's got to make the best of a situation he wanted to get out of.
All three guys on the practice field today, Sam Bradford, Carson Wentz, Chase Daniel. How do you rank those guys? How did they look today, John? And were you one of the people live tweeting every throw?
Well, I'm not the live tweeting type, especially today because it was raining, so I didn't want to mess up my eyes. But it's the first day of on-field activity, so you're not going to learn a whole lot. It's as you would have imagined, and the fact that Sam was the number one quarterback, Carson was number 3, and that's how they're going to go about it. And Carson's going to be brought along very, very slowly. The one thing you see about the difference between the two is just how much sturdier Carson Wentz is as a player as far as his body, his frame. He just looks like he's put together better than Sam Bradford. Both of them have tremendous arm talent, and we've always known that about Sam. But you can see long-term some of the concerns with Bradford coming out were the fact that he was injury-prone. He had a shoulder injury coming out of Oklahoma, and obviously he's had a ton of injuries at the professional level. I think the Eagles look at Carson Wentz as a guy who can hold up better simply because he's such a big guy and he's so athletic. They feel he's going to have a longer shelf life.
We'll get off the quarterback for just a second and ask you about running back. Darren Sproles not at OTAs, and there's some reports that the Eagles took calls on draft day to maybe trade him. Do you have any update on Darren Sproles?
Yeah, that's an interesting situation because there's some smoke to that fire. Doug talked about it, and he said the Eagles weren't interested in trading him. They're not listening to offers. He wants him on the team. But he hasn't been here the entire time. And early on, the claim from the Eagles was that he was excused for family reasons, and now it's become clear that he's not showing up until the mandatory minicamp. If he shows up then, and we'll see. We'll all be waiting. But there's got to be some smoke to that fire because Darren Sproles is not that type of guy. And the report from the NFL Network was basically he's going to stay away until it gets, quote, sorted out. So whatever that means, I think there's some smoke to the fire that the Eagles were listening to trade offers.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Were you surprised, John, that Doug Peterson essentially handed Alan Barbre the starting left guard spot today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he handed it to him, but he took all the first-team reps, and he called Alan Barbre is another guy. He called his guy, and Doug tends to do that. That's my guy. This is my guy. He's very glad-handish in that way, and but that's going to be a competition throughout training camp. He's obviously the starter coming off last season, and he's been giving sort of that deference as starting out as the starter again. But I don't think you should read too much into those comments. That's going to be one of the biggest position battles of training camp. And remember, one of the guys isn't even here, and that's Isaac Seumalo, because Oregon State is on the quarter system, and that's that weird rule where he's got to go back to school and he can't show up again until training camp. So today it was Alan Barbre. Malcolm Bunch ran with the second team. Andrew Gardner with the third team. Seumalo is going to be in that mix. And Stefan Wisniewski, too, was the backup center today. Eventually, I think he's going to get some reps at left guard. So that position battle is far from over.
John, what about the running back spot? We know Sproles not there. Was Wendell Smallwood impressive in his first reps with the big club?
Yeah, in fact, Doug kind of mentioned what a good receiver he is and just natural coming out of the backfield catching the football. I think they see a lot of Darren Sproles' like ability in him because he's a smaller guy, obviously not quite as small as Darren, but he's got that natural knack for catching the ball in the flat and doing some things in space. But, you know, if you think about where we are in the backfield, and we talked about it, Mike, before we knew Darren Sproles maybe wasn't going to be in the mix and how much they're counting on Wendell Smallwood as a fifth-round pick. All of a sudden, if Darren Sproles isn't there, that just puts more on his plate. So there might not be a more important rookie to this team this season, because obviously Carson Wentz is going to be brought along slowly. And they're asking a ton of Smallwood right now.
John, some other observations from day one at the OTAs. Get your insight on what the cornerback spot, who lined up out there. Because as you talked about yesterday, today's really the first day to kind of see how that depth chart stacks up. And corner is going to be a very interesting spot come training camp.
Yeah, the starters were Eric Rowe and Leotis McKelvin. Nolan Carroll is still working his way back from the injury, and he only did individual workouts. He didn't do any team drills, so understand that going in. But I can tell you, it's day one, but Leotis McKelvin is worlds above any other cornerback they have. He just understands how to play the position, broke up a number of passes, specifically had his way with Josh Huff on a number of occasions. He's an NFL player, and you can see it, but the concern with him, he's had a lot of injury issues in Buffalo. The talent, though, is there, and you understand that because he's a former first-round pick.
John, how about the atmosphere that we couldn't see, not on the practice field, but number of cameras that were on the sideline, extra media? Did it just have a different feel today? Yeah, it's always a big deal. The Eagles, believe it or not, have the largest media contingency in the NFL. They have it every year. And the first day of OTAs is always a big deal, so you see a number of extra bodies.
national people, NFL Network people, and that's one of the issues. And you talk about Carson Wentz getting the mock press conference when the Eagles interviewed him. That's the reason why, because there is so much media that follows this team on a day in and day out basis. And I often talk about it. One of Chip Kelly's problems when he was here is he couldn't believe that we would talk about the fourth and fifth cornerback. He would just be shocked. And that speaks to the love affair this fan base has with their football team. But it can be difficult on both, obviously, the players and the organization itself. But that's unfortunately the reality the Eagles have.
Yep, and as you mentioned, he can't believe they're talking about the second and third position. What about the starting and backup defensive ends? We know they have a lot of money with Barbre, Vinny Curry, Brandon Graham, first-round pick from a couple of years ago, Marcus Smith. How did those four guys line up?
Well, it was interesting because Connor Barwin, and this surprised me, he was the starting right defensive end ahead of Brandon Graham. So it was Barwin and Vinny Curry on the left side as the starters, and then Brandon Graham on the right side behind Connor, and Marcus Smith on the left side behind Vinny Curry. So that's how they started. You kind of know those three guys, speaking specifically of Curry, Barwin, and Graham, are going to get the majority of the snaps, and I imagine that somebody's going to have to flip over and play a little bit of left side also. But it's interesting because all those old 3-4 linebackers under Chip Kelly have all been moved to defensive end. Even guys like Brian Brayman and Travis Long, they've all been moved to defensive end in Jim Schwartz's 4-3 scheme. So it's going to be interesting how that shakes out. One of the most concerning things, because obviously Fletcher Cox isn't here, and that's no surprise. So who was lining up in the 3 technique as his replacement? Taylor Hart, which shows you the Eagles don't have a ton of depth at defensive tackle.
John will have more on today's OTAs over at 97.3 ESPN.com. I see he's working on a piece from the NovaCare Center as we speak, so we'll let him get back to that so you can get more insight on today's practice. And as John mentioned, it's really the setting up of the depth chart there to get a look at who's getting the first opportunity. And the big thing we learned today, at least on that starting offensive line, is that Alan Barbre is getting the first opportunity to play left guard. And as John just mentioned there as well, Connor Barwin on that defensive line, and Leotis McKelvin kind of standing out at corner. He's at JF McMullen on Twitter for more from the NovaCare complex today in Philadelphia. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.